at the Municipal Art Gallery, and I curated this group exhibition, Experimentations, the Art of Controlled Procedures. And today we're going to be hearing from 3 artists that are featured in the exhibition that I'm so honored have agreed to be in the show. And yeah, so a little bit about the exhibition. It was kind of for me, an experiment too in some ways, but we were thinking about the PST initiative and the Getty and the Art and Science Collide theme. And even though my show isn't really part of that program, but the show across the way is, I was thinking of different ways and thinking about how art and science intersect. And so it's kind of a play on the topic. It's also a playful fusion. I think, art is one of these amazing fields that does intersect with so many different fields of study, so many subject matters. And I was really, I arrived at this place of thinking about artists and their process and how things work, how things don't work. The journey for an artist from like the concept to the process to how it manifests in the end. So I purposely wanted the show to be intergenerational. I was thinking about conceptualism from the early days along with kind of where we are with that subject matter now. We can get kind of maybe into the logistics of that in a little bit. But I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that you're here. I'm so excited to introduce you to Carmen Argote, Shana Lutker, and Analia Saban, which you probably all know. We all kind of know each other. So so I guess I'll start maybe with you, Carmen, since you're sitting right next to me. If you could just introduce us a little bit to the works in the show, and how you got there.
Okay. Does this work? Or you have to flip it on. Oops. I think it's on. Is it on? Is it working? Is it working? Here. There it is. So the work is in a way, in one way it's a continuation of this idea of play space. The play space being like the place where if I imagine myself to be like a child, it's that place that's kind of private yet public, that's near the parent, but sort of on the side. So with that idea, I've been thinking about the play space, and I had used the play space in a previous show, but it was just all completely white, this white kind of demarcation area. And after the show, I had this almost like remnant. It's like, where do we start again? Or how does one begin again in that creative process? And so the play space became a place of play and literally letting go of a lot of these things of trying to make an important, work or trying to do anything other than enjoying the process of potato printing in this case. So printing with potatoes seemed to be something that I could use my hand with and making smart in relationship to my body, right? And then as I was kind of doing that, I started playing with the images that I was kind of getting, making them into almost like, animal-like, forms and art makings that surround me. So that's the initial play space. And it was really a point of departure. It got me unstuck. Because I had been really stuck in terms of how do I, once you finish a show, how do you begin again? So that's that circular area that you see. And from there, I started this, let's call it, to make more works, trying to access that point of play. But they weren't working. So I was making these rectangular, let's call them paintings, with potato prints. And they were working in one way, but they were not working in the other. And the way that they were not working was that they ended up being rejected by, let's say, a gallerist or something like that. And then I was really distraught, because it had been like the sensitive point of departure, starting from the circle, and then now I was making these paintings and like they kind of weren't working. And it wasn't until, I think actually, Nancy might have seen them, I don't know. Anyway, we had this studio visit, and I felt really good. I felt seen, I don't know, I just was in that kind of mode, and I wanted to play again, and playing in this case involved destruction anyway. Like, I started ripping them apart, and making something with them, a sculptural work. In this case, they became the rejected painting figures. And once I made the first figure, I had this moment where it looked back at me, and I was like, oh, it's an art. Oh my gosh. So it was like this struggle to get there, but it could only happen through that letting go, and then that destruction, or like remaking again, or like, letting something go to be able to encounter it again. So that's a little bit about the work, and that's so the rejected painting figures, each one holds like, I don't know, like 7 paintings, maybe like more, that are painted on both sides. So they're kind of holding that energy, and they kind of they're kind of like also like playful fools, because they're like upside down. So I was thinking about the fool archetype as well, in that way. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I just want to express appreciation for you starting this talk about experimentations with, it's like not really working for me, right? Okay, but then it's way too loud.
Do you want to try this one, or you want to just try projecting?
It works, it just sounds right. Okay. Anyway, appreciation for Carmen talking about like being stuck and failure and rejection in the context of experimentations on the show. I think it's really actually a beautiful starting point. And kind of what is experimentation except like an opportunity to fail. Otherwise, you're just succeeding. Anyway, so to talk about the works of the show, over here behind this wall is this work called A to B that I made in collaboration with John Baldessari in 2011, so probably 2010 or so. We were paired together by the curator, Sarah Bancroft, to make a piece for a show that was at the Orange County Museum of Art. And so just sort of started meeting with John. I knew John from, I was a student of his at UCLA when I was there, which it seems worth mentioning that Analia and Carmen and I were all at UCLA at the same time. And it was John's last year's teaching year, I guess, right? He retired in 06. Yeah, he retired in 05 when Leah and I finished our MFAs. So the piece kind of came together quite easily, thinking about sort of some of the questions at the center of both of our practices, I think. So thinking about viewers and interpretation and play. And so almost like Carmen's work or something like that work as a play space or a viewer that kind of undermines and highlights the sort of rules of a viewer in an art space and allows them to kind of transgress a little bit in a way that is playful and also like an element of surprise when you encounter the work and don't quite know what you're looking at, but all the pieces are there, they're all quite clear. Once you kind of put them together, there's no like smoke and mirrors, but it still has some kind of surprise in it, even though you know what it is. And so, what else can I say about that? It was the objects or sort of just objects that I chose that felt like generic objects. I don't know how much more to say about them, but or objecty objects that, again, have this sort of like playfulness in them. And the work here is the staff. It's, I call it a performance script. And this is the second or third one piece that I've made in the last year or so, where, again, kind of inviting the art viewer to act in a different way in the space, and kind of acknowledging that all art really happens in the mind of the viewer, in the kind of act of interpretation. And so this performance script contains an invitation for you, all, a viewer, to kind of take it up, to read it, to perform it in your mind, or to perform it in space. So just a way to kind of falsely delineate the kind of difference between those, I guess, in terms of your, I'll just, the script itself comes from, was inspired by a description of a dance performance by Valesca, who's an artist who I've been kind of working with her legacy and her works for a long time, and that they also embody some of this kind of attention to the viewer's role in performing or in interpreting the artwork as being the artwork itself. And it's also kind of playful and a sort of joke, like, yeah, you could perform this work right now, right? You can play with these objects and you're making the art. So it kind of undermines the authority of the artist too, in a way. That's all I'll say now. I'll hand it.
Thank you for coming. So nice to reunite. We know each other for so long now. It's kind of crazy. Thank you, Nancy, for curating the show. It's great. And in terms of my work, just some right and those things at the end, I would say I came to art through a bit as an outsider, always trying to understand what art is. I still don't fully understand it, to be honest. I don't know why these objects are on the wall. So I keep asking those questions through my work. And I took a lot of computer science classes while I was at UCLA, and it's something that I'm interested in. I think now I just saw a whale that was like driving so violently, and I was like, oh, that's right, it learns from us, you know, like humans. And now even more, I feel like computers are playing a bigger role, more than we can imagine sometimes. And so I think about like what is art, what is painting. Is art like a system in a way? I mean, like, is there an order to it? Can you just kind of make it through an algorithm? So these works kind of connect, these networks of circuit boards, and like tries to like find the connection between art history and abstraction and geometry with what's happening in computers at the moment. So it's ongoing. I don't have any answers, but I'm having a great time in the exploration, I would say.
I don't know.
Yeah, are you uncomfortable with the mic? Do we want to maybe not use it?
It's weird. That's play with it.
But yeah, I wanted to go thank you all for participating on the show. I want to go back to actually what Shana did point out, and I meant to point out, I kind of was thinking about teasing it out. And strangely, I didn't realize the coincidence that all three of you went to UCLA at the same time. I don't know, but we're also of the same generation, more or less. So I was kind of curious to know what that connection was. Was it subconscious on my part? Was it unconscious or conscious? I don't know. So I started to think about some of like the similarities and the differences, and I was kind of talking to Carmen a little bit about your practices and the approach, how I think that there's a
Maybe it's like how to deconstruct what we learned, or you know, like how to undo um, the expectations, and maybe like the way that I was making while I was at UCLA, and like how to find one's own way and one's own practice. That's kind of what I think of, because I was at UCLA and I was working with Adrian Sachs, and I was mostly working in ceramics. And in that, like, my approach at that time was very much planned. So there was a lot of there was not a lot of room for like surprise, or I didn't leave myself a lot of room for surprise, because the material was so sort of like you have to do one step to get to the next step, and you have to do it in a certain order so that it ideally come out with the way that you would want it to come out. So there was a lot of, I don't know, like will, I guess, or like kind of knowing, and like at that time. I think gradually what I've had to deconstruct is like that wanting of like that way of working, and what has emerged is really like an allowing of the not yet known, an allowing of also embodiment, because I don't think my practice was very embodied at that time, and so there is also what I've learned from my artwork since that time is that art is really like a conversation with the art object, and that's kind of what leads me to the next thing. It's also a conversation with my own psyche. So it's just a lot. It's really different, and I for me it's been more of a letting go, I think, more than anything. But also there was this very intense like competitiveness at that time that I feel like it just mutated into something else, or like there's a competitiveness that's just with my own like desire, like what I want.
I think, like, listening to Carmen, I was thinking too about this moment in LA. Like, so, or at least Analia and I were doing MFA the same years, 20 years ago. And, at UCLA, it was a moment almost of correction against, like, this late 90s, like, gallery boom explosion. So we got to miss that part. But we, in a kind of what felt to me like a slightly quieter moment, but where LA, our world market was kind of still growing up a little. Everyone has a different slice of this story, but I think I felt less pressure personally than I think maybe had happened like 5 years before we were there, or something like that. I don't know. And it's hard to explain, but it was also a moment at UCLA when a lot of the people who had been core faculty were reaching retirement. So after we left, by a few years later, there was only Kathy Opie is still there. So John retired, Paul McCarthy, Chris Burden, Nancy.
I don't really think we worked with similar faculty. I worked with Nancy, but not with like John, not with so there was not a lot of.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, we probably had more overlap, but so I don't know. I think that when I think of that time at UCLA, I also think about that moment of becoming an artist in Los Angeles and what that meant, and how many people from that time are still here that I'm still connected to. Also, we, Nancy, have known this whole time as well. Like, just kind of, it felt like a good time to lay roots, which is why also I'm still here, even though I surprised myself with that.
I think that's the nice part. inspired, and LAMAG, like Michael Gomez, and just like all these leaders who really like built it up, and then the galleries started to open up, and the universities were already there, and I think they had more exposure. That's the nice part. UCLA itself, I'm trying to forget, like as much as it was probably the worst time of my life. It made me the artist I am today, so I'm very grateful for it. But I hate it every second of it. I made some friends out. I did make friends out.
Ceramic was so not cool.
Nobody really like the ceramics.
Because we were like these sort of outsiders. Of
Better to be an outsider.
Yeah. And then the economy crashed in 2008. That was
Tough times.
yeah, tough times.
But here we are.
I know that some of you have questions for each other, maybe. But yeah, I'm happy to take questions from the audience too. I mean, we're not really on a strict, topic here.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, we love them. Or we can talk. We can keep talking.
Question for Shana. So in the work that's in that room, like I noticed that when I was choosing the objects, I was also thinking about like which objects and how I was arranging them, and like there's this kind of thing that, and I don't know how others experience the work, but I kind of pass by the screens first, and I go into the playroom, and I start looking at like how I'm arranging the objects, and just like start wondering why I'm choosing certain objects, or maybe I don't. But there's like this odd moment of reflection when I see my arrangement sort of mirrored back to me. So if you could talk about like that idea of like mirroring or like seeing one's actions like with that mediation of the monitor.
Yeah, so to quote the text, I believe it says this work is about choosing objects or something, right? So it is, and that to me, when I forget exactly what it says, but like that feels like the John part to me, like just being able to identify this work is about choosing objects. Because I think for my interest and about choice, right? I get really excited about this moment that you described when you see what you made from a different perspective, and you couldn't have seen it that way when you were making it, so like this kind of surprise at like what you made, and so there's something kind of like a charge in that, and maybe it's some like element of like the uncanny, like also it's this kind of thing that you're making something and you see it from your perspective, but like then the technology or the camera sees it from a different perspective that you can't inhabit. So yeah, I like both of those elements are really good with stuff.
I have a question for Carmen about materials. When I think of your work, I also think of the coffee beans, like using actual coffee as a painting medium in a way, as a drawing medium, and also the body as a brush in a way, like the extension of the body. So I was wondering if you could talk about that, like materials and also like the body as a tool.
Yeah. So this year, I kind of got back to like acrylic on canvas, but like trying not to make a painting in a way. They're always like made on the floor. Like there's smears and finger marks. This one's potato prints. And like recently, I have been using like my body, like actually like as a mark making. My forearms and my like legs and everything, doing like yoga like poses to make kind of smears, but the acrylic really very strange. The acrylic was like, I think because it's so connected to painting, it set me into like almost like a manic, like I like it, I don't like it, I like it, I don't like it mode, and that was very odd to me. I was actually very uncomfortable. But I didn't want to use that material intentionally. I think it was like somewhere because of the color mixing properties that I kind of liked and enjoyed, and also its association with like painting, but trying not to do that.
Works that are on view here, where the computer or the machine does the work of the body, and also thinking about connecting your two works, like thinking about destruction and your kind of comment before, like, I don't even know what these things are on the wall. Not necessarily your work, but in general, like what is a painting, right? And how, so maybe you could talk a little bit about your relationship to embodiment and that kind of like giving the body to the machine, or that confusion.
That's a very nice question. I think it's always for me finding a tool that has both, because people sometimes think that like, oh, I push 2 buttons and I walk away and the piece gets made, but like it's totally the opposite. Like we do have a tool and it's very high tech. Did that piece, and it's very like sophisticated. It can do a very difficult pattern, but like at the same, that's like the computer section, and then the human section where like putting thread by thread, and like every, like a woven piece can be something like 10,000 threads on the vertical, so that means that like 10,000 times, you're like weaving. So one time, and then another time, and then another time, and after 6 months or so, you have like 10,000 times that you go through it and that the piece is made. So I do think there is always a connection with the body, and then this piece on the right, it's basically a layer of ink, and it's printing ink, and then a paper cutout on top. So the yellow is just like almost like a stencil, like a paper cutout. I like to change the order. Usually we like to ink on papers. I wanted to do paper on ink, and as kind of again as simple as it looks, as an idea, we're like pouring off this huge amount of ink. I keep it kind of clean for like the first 5 minutes, and then at the end I'm like, oh, I look at myself in the mirror, I'm like completely black, and it's oil-based, it doesn't come out. And then I use, in that particular case, I chose just printer's ink. It's oil-based. I think there is a connection with the body in the ink itself. I do feel like we are bags of fluid as bodies. I think the body reacts to it when you look at it. There is a connection. Depending on the material you use, you will have like an unconscious kind of conversation with it. That's my belief. So there is something about the shine and the fact that it is a fossil material that like, I think it shows in the work. So there is always connection. For you, Shana, I always admired. So Shana was in interdisciplinary studio, which is kind of where like the super smart kids were, and they could like go through like all the material provided by Mary Kelly and like super dense theory, and I was like, I had like always a hard time with that stuff. Like it put me to sleep very quickly. But anyway, I always wanted to know more about your connection with psychology and especially with psychoanalysis, because it's something I'm interested in, and I think you approach it in a very different way.
Okay. I have, I'm just still processing that question, but I have a kind of like, for one, I did work with a lot of that theory in college too, so when I came to grad school, I had already read all of it once, right? So it was a kind of like a different engagement, but from a similar school. I think that what drew me in, and my project at UCLA, my MFA project ended up being kind of 2-year study into the invention of psychoanalysis itself, and through reading Freud kind of from the beginning through most of his major works, and then creating a body of work that kind of jumped out of that. And so I think I had the same question, like, why am I drawn to psychoanalysis, and the way to sort of figure that out. And so now I can say, I think that what this kind of failure of translation of the unconscious into language, that's that failure that we are always repeating. Like, you can never actually translate what is in your mind out into language. Like, it's always inefficient or insufficient. And I think there's something in art that repeats that process, where whatever our ideas are, then they become something else, and then they're received and interpreted. And there's so many steps and failures and misinterpretations. They're not necessarily bad, but along the way. So there's a kind of mirroring in this very sort of fundamental translation of language that I find in art. And so trying to understand that is kind of my interest. So that kind of happens in language and happens in thinking about dreams and the unconscious, and is still where my interest lies.
I'm curious to know, Analia, about your continued interest in technology, and do you see yourself continuing to work with algorithms in this vein, or are you in any way thinking about deconstructing it further?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything is technology. Like the concrete floor that we're sitting on is like incredible. Like it has come a long way. It looks like nothing, and then it carries the history of chemicals and where the material came from, and the making, and like there's just so much, and the materials we are looking at. I think acrylic paint is like it's a plastic. I mean, like we kind of have to think about like why are we even painting with plastics, and if not like saying anything against it. It's just the fact that it's weird that we are even using plastics, even acrylic paint, and people sometimes ask so much about like longevity, and I'm like, yes, we will have a ton of acrylic paintings for many years because they don't decompose, like they don't go anywhere. Like I tried it, I put it in an aging machine at the beginning where the conversations can be more timely. I find a lot of meaning in like, I used not to find meaning in art, to be honest. It took me a long time to, I had more of those questions, I think, when I was already your age. And I think as I get older, I see a lot of value in traveling, in like connecting with other artists, with a different audience, and finding a language beyond language. And like, I feel like it's a movement for peace, actually. I think it connects people, it doesn't divide people. So, and in front of technology, I think the value of the handmade and the value of ideas that are more original than what a computer can do. So I'm between those, like on the one hand super worried, and on the other hand I do find more meaning in how the world we make. But I worry.
Yeah, I mean, I can keep talking about worries for a long time, but I think it will stress everybody out.
Question?
This is not like a fully formal question, but I'm kind of curious how each of you not necessarily think of how you currently think of like the subconscious and unconscious, but what are you thinking about how other people can access it? And you're thinking about like maybe the way that art might be composition can enter it, or some people talk about creating psychomagic acts, or where artists are I'm curious if any of you thought about like making that more of a thing that other people can access.
Yeah, well, I think to that question, like the two works that I have in the show try to highlight that question, right, of your choice, of how you want to engage, how far you want to go, how much you're open to play, or so I think your question, I think is embodied in these two works as a question about art, right? Like almost like they're asking that question and then the viewer has to respond.
I like the question. I think I like to think a lot about the inner meaning inside the material I use. Like what does, like from the start, like if I'm going to use like linen, which is an undyed, unprocessed fiber coming from the fields in Belgium, actually. That material already carries a lot of information in itself. So I try to think of like, okay, so what does the material say against, let's say, an image of a circuit board, which is totally handmade and totally like, processed by a human, designed for a function. So I try to kind of think about like putting those words together and then thinking about the viewer, what would be your reading of those forces. But it's something I think about a lot. In my case, I would say more through materials.
I think more and more I embrace the process of not knowing or like the not yet known and then coming to know what the art is about. And it is a lot of times it's through material that I make the things with the hand, through the materials, but the words of like what is the idea or what is this about? Just to like let that go and trust that as I work through it, it'll reveal itself to me, that it actually will tell me. And I think that's what is actually, that's my hope is that thing that's not yet known can be shared with others. So it's something like I'm holding that process for others to kind of like be able to experience it along with me because it is a surprise. And I think it's important that it's a surprise. It makes it more, I don't know, like fun and valuable, and it brings me joy in sort of getting to know what that is.
I just want to add one thing, which is like the word responsibility that kind of comes into mind in thinking about like these works as the responsibility of the viewer. So highlighting our own responsibility as a viewer to really make the work, like in our interpretation, and thinking about that expanded kind of to art as a peace movement or something. I don't know, like thinking about that responsibility is also like our responsibility as citizens, or so just to highlight like the need to do or think or be a part of something.
Even like that word responsibility, I always separate it out. Yeah, because I find that it never made sense to me as like one word, but it makes a lot of sense to me as like our ability to respond to something. Like it gives us back our agency. Whereas like as one word, it was always like this punishing. Yeah.
Speaking of responsibility, I'm curious to know, because each of you has held like positions in education, I'm curious about mentorship, how, being good citizens, how important is, or was it something that you sought out to do as artists to also be in a position of teaching and, being part of a community where you were sharing or learning things from one another? How important is that to you?
I'm holding myself's answer for me. I think that being being a part of the artist community in Los Angeles is like why I am an artist, right? So like when I think about making work, I think about being in conversation with artists more than anything else. And you know, I spent many years helping run Extra and as a kind of site for critical thinking about art that was put a lot of emphasis on artists writing themselves and helping artists to be a part of that conversation in different ways too. So, yeah, so from our perspective, I think like the community and the conversation, and also the intergenerational and cross-generation conversation, all of that is kind of very important to me as an artist.
Yeah, I think it's part of, comes with the package in a way, or it's, I think we all do it. I don't know many artists who don't engage in some type of practice of sharing the work more than the verbal, I would say, or like other than the work we make. And yeah, I think it is satisfying. I mean, I always feel I walk away with more than I give. I mean, when I get invited to all these visiting artist gigs in different parts of the country, and it's kind of fascinating. Or even like at SciArt for architecture, sometimes they go for all the committees and stuff, and I'm learning more than I feel like I can give to them, and it's amazing. I am very intimidated. I have a high school class from Oakwood coming to my studio. No, that's kind of freaking me out because I have no idea what the younger they are, like it's harder to read their minds and they don't say a lot, and you're like, are they even here? Like I don't know. So anyway, I'm worried about that. I enjoy it.
Are they art students or just
High school? No, there is no art student in high school. They're high school students. Yeah.